Connor Blake and his pack of senior athletes made tormenting overweight freshmen their daily sport. But they had no idea that their favorite target, Marcus Chen, was quietly spending his afternoons learning the sweet science of boxing from a decorated Marine Corps veteran. Soon, their cruel game would backfire in ways they never expected. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The halls of Riverside High echoed with Connor Blake's taunting voice. "Hey, Tubby, you're taking up the whole hallway." His varsity jacket-clad friends snickered as they surrounded Marcus Chen, a heavyset freshman who kept his eyes fixed on the floor. Connor and his two sidekicks, Dominic and Tyler, ruled the school's social hierarchy through fear and intimidation, particularly targeting those they deemed weak or different. Every morning, Marcus would take the longest possible route to his locker, mapping out alternate paths to avoid Connor's usual hangout spots. But somehow, they always seemed to find him. Connor, the star quarterback with a perfectly styled undercut and expensive clothes, made it his mission to remind Marcus daily of his place in the social hierarchy. "What's that lunch you got there, fatty?" Connor would sneer, hovering over Marcus's shoulder in the cafeteria. "Trying to break another chair?" Dominic and Tyler's synchronized laughter would follow, drawing unwanted attention from nearby tables. Marcus would shrink further into himself, wishing he could disappear into thin air. Marcus wasn't just their favorite target because of his size. His quiet nature and refusal to fight back made him seem like an easy mark. What they didn't know was that behind his silence lay years of repressed anger, waiting for a catalyst to ignite it. Every insult, every shove, every humiliating moment was carefully filed away in his memory, fueling a growing determination to change. At least Marcus had two loyal friends who stuck by him. Peter, a science club president who shared his love of manga, and Sarah, an art student who saw past his size to his gentle nature. They were fellow outcasts who found strength in their small circle, even though they couldn't prevent the daily torment Connor's group inflicted. During lunch breaks, they'd huddle together in the far corner of the cafeteria, creating their own safe haven amid the chaos. "Just ignore them," Peter would say, pushing his thick-rimmed glasses up his nose. "They're just jealous because you got the highest grade in biology." Sarah would nod in agreement, her vibrant blue-streaked hair bobbing as she sketched in her notebook. But they all knew that ignoring the problem wouldn't make it go away. At home, things weren't much easier. Marcus's mother, a hard-working nurse on night shifts, noticed her son's increasingly withdrawn behavior, but couldn't get him to open up about what was happening at school. "Everything's fine, Mom," he'd say, picking at his dinner while avoiding her concerned gaze. "Just regular high school stuff." The dark circles under her eyes from working double shifts made him reluctant to burden her with his problems. His room had become his sanctuary, walls covered with posters of legendary boxers and UFC fighters. Marcus would spend hours watching their matches on YouTube, dreaming of having their confidence, their strength, their ability to stand up for themselves. Little did anyone suspect that this seemingly timid freshman would soon shock everyone who had ever underestimated him, especially Connor Blake and his gang of tormentors. The breaking point came during a particularly humid Wednesday afternoon. Connor and his crew cornered Marcus near the bike racks after school. "You've been avoiding us, Butterball," Connor sneered, shoving Marcus against the metal rack. The clang of bikes falling drew the attention of nearby students, who quickly formed a circle around them, phones raised to capture whatever happened next. "Please, just leave me alone," Marcus muttered, his voice barely audible. But his plea only seemed to encourage Connor more. "What's that?" "Couldn't hear you over all that heavy breathing," Connor mocked, his varsity ring glinting in the afternoon sun. "Maybe you need some exercise. How about we help you with that?" As Connor's friends moved to grab Marcus's backpack, a deep voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Is there a problem here?" The crowd parted to reveal Mr. Rodriguez, the new security guard, a tall man with military straight posture and eyes that had seen real combat. Connor's smirk faltered slightly as he backed away from Marcus. "Just having a friendly chat, sir," he said. maintaining his cocky demeanor despite the guard's intimidating presence. Mr. Rodriguez's gaze lingered on Marcus, noting the boy's trembling hands and defeated posture. There was something in that look that would later prove to be the turning point in Marcus's life, though neither of them knew it yet. As the crowd dispersed and Connor's gang skulked away, with empty threats of later fatso, Marcus gathered his scattered belongings, unaware that this moment would mark the beginning of his transformation. The seeds of change had been planted, and soon, the halls of Riverside High would witness an evolution that no one saw coming. For now, though, Marcus remained the same overweight freshman who drew the wrong kind of attention, carrying the weight of his tormentor's words along with his extra pounds. But behind his quiet exterior, something was shifting, a realization that things couldn't continue this way forever. Change was coming, and when it did, Connor Blake would learn the hard way that appearances can be deceiving. And the following week brought a change to Connor's usual bullying routine. Instead of just verbal taunts and minor shoving, he decided to escalate things. "Hey, Chunky," Connor called out across the emptying hallway after last period. "We've been thinking, you take up so much space in this school, you should be paying rent." Marcus froze mid-step, his heart racing as Connor and his crew surrounded him. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Connor's face, making his smirk look even more menacing. Dominic and Tyler flanked him like well-trained attack dogs, cutting off any escape routes. $200 ought to cover it," Connor declared, crossing his arms. "Consider it your big boy tax." The amount might as well have been $2 million to Marcus, whose single mother could barely keep up with regular bills. I don't have that kind of money," Marcus stammered, clutching his backpack tighter against his chest like a shield. Connor's fake smile disappeared. "Well, then we have a problem, don't we? Because if you don't pay up by the end of the month, me and my boys here are going to have to start charging interest." He punctuated his threat by shoving Marcus hard against the lockers, the metal clang echoing through the empty corridor. From around the corner, Peter and Sarah watched helplessly, knowing intervention would only make things worse. Sarah's hands trembled as she filmed the interaction on her phone, hoping it might be useful as evidence later, though they all knew the school administration rarely took bullying seriously. "And don't even think about running to Mommy or the teachers," Connor added, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Or we'll make sure everyone sees that video of you struggling in gym class last week. You know, the one where you couldn't even climb the rope? It'd make a great viral sensation." Just then, heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. Mr. Rodriguez appeared, his presence causing Connor's gang to step back instinctively. But before the security guard could reach them, they had already melted away, leaving behind their usual wake of destruction and fear. "Everything okay here?" Mr. Rodriguez asked, his eyes scanning the scene with military precision. Marcus nodded automatically, the practiced lie coming easily. "Yes, sir, everything's fine." But Mr. Rodriguez noticed the dent in the locker where Marcus had been shoved, the scattered papers on the floor, and the way the boy's hands were still shaking. Later that evening, Marcus sat alone in his room, staring at his meager savings, $43 and some change, nowhere near enough to meet Connor's demands. The sound of his mother moving around in the kitchen downstairs only added to his guilt. She worked so hard already, he couldn't bear to ask her for money. The next day at school, things got worse. Connor's crew seemed to be everywhere, making sure Marcus couldn't forget about their demand. During lunch, they knocked his tray to the floor, sending his food scattering across the cafeteria tiles. "Better save that lunch money for your rent," Tyler sneered as other students laughed. Peter tried to help clean up the mess while Sarah confronted one of the girls who had been recording the incident. "Delete that right now," she demanded, her usual artistic calm replaced by fierce loyalty to her friend. "Or what, freak?" the girl responded, already typing something on her phone that would undoubtedly make Marcus's humiliation go viral within the school's social circles. The situation reached a breaking point during PE class. While changing in the locker room, Marcus discovered all his clothes had been stuffed into one of the toilets. He had to wear his sweaty gym clothes for the rest of the day, enduring whispers and pointing from his classmates. But it was what happened after school that would change everything. Connor and his gang cornered Marcus behind the gymnasium, away from any security cameras or watchful eyes. "Time's ticking on that payment, lard ass," Connor taunted, shoving Marcus against the brick wall. This time, though, something different happened. As Marcus stumbled, trying to keep his balance, a figure stepped out from around the corner. It was Jason Chen, no relation to Marcus, a senior known for his mysterious aura and the rumors that surrounded him. Some said he was involved in underground fight clubs. Others whispered about connections to local gangs. 4 against 1, Jason observed coolly, his presence immediately charging the air with tension. "Real brave, Blake." Connor's swagger faltered slightly. Jason's reputation preceded him, and even Connor wasn't stupid enough to start something with someone who had allegedly put 3 guys in the hospital last summer. "This ain't your business, Chen," Connor spat, but he had already taken a step back. "I'm making it my business," Jason replied, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken threats. "Walk away now, and we'll forget this happened." Connor hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Finally, with a frustrated grunt, he backed off. "This isn't over," he warned Marcus, but the threat sounded hollow under Jason's watchful gaze. After Connor's gang disappeared, Jason turned to Marcus. "You can't let them push you around forever, kid," he said, his eyes carrying a knowledge that seemed beyond his years. "There's a place you should check out, Old Marine's Gym on Wilson Street. Ask for Sergeant Martinez, tell him Jason sent you." Before Marcus could thank him, Jason was gone, leaving Marcus with a choice to make. The address burned in his mind like a beacon of hope, but also terrified him. Going to a gym meant facing his insecurities head-on, something he'd avoided for years. That night, Marcus lay awake in bed, Jason's words echoing in his head. On his phone, he pulled up the location of Old Marine's Gym. It was a 40-minute bus ride away, in a part of town his mother had always told him to avoid. Yet something about Jason's recommendation felt different from the usual empty advice to just stand up for yourself that adults always gave. The next morning, Marcus made his decision. He couldn't keep living in fear, waiting for the next humiliation, the next demand for money he didn't have. Something had to change, and for the first time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he had found a way to make that change happen. The decision to visit Old Marine's Gym weighed heavily on Marcus's mind for several days. Each morning he promised himself he'd go after school, and each afternoon he found a reason not to. But Connor's escalating harassment finally forced his hand. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Marcus had stayed late at school, helping Peter with a science project, thinking Connor and his crew would be gone. He was wrong. They ambushed him near the student parking lot, away from the watchful eyes of Mr. Rodriguez or any other staff members. "Time's up, Tubby," Connor announced, his varsity jacket darkening with the rain. "Where's our money?" Marcus's heart pounded as he clutched his backpack. "I told you, I don't have it," he managed to say, his voice shaking less than usual. Connor's face hardened. "Wrong answer." He nodded to Dominic and Tyler, who grabbed Marcus's arms while Connor landed a solid punch to his stomach. The pain doubled Marcus over, and his knees hit the wet pavement hard. "You think Jason Chen's always going to be around to save you?" Connor taunted, landing another blow. Time to learn what happens to people who don't pay their debts. The beating lasted only a few minutes, but to Marcus, it felt like hours. When they finally left him there in the rain, his nose was bleeding, and his ribs ached with every breath. Somehow he managed to pull himself up and stumble toward the bus stop, his wet clothes clinging to his body. Instead of heading home, Marcus found himself pulling out his phone and looking up the route to Old Marine's Gym. His hands trembled as he typed in the address, partly from the cold rain, partly from lingering fear, and partly from a new emotion he couldn't quite identify. Determination, maybe, or desperation. The bus ride to Wilson Street seemed to take forever. Each stop brought him closer to a neighborhood that looked increasingly worn down. Old warehouses, abandoned storefronts, and graffiti-covered walls. When he finally got off at his stop, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Old Marine's gym didn't look like much from the outside. The building was a converted warehouse with faded red brick walls and a simple metal sign above the door. Through the grimy windows, Marcus could see the glow of fluorescent lights and the shadows of people moving inside. Taking a deep breath that made his bruised ribs protest, Marcus pushed open the heavy door. The interior was a stark contrast to the building's exterior. While not fancy or modern, everything was meticulously clean and well-organized. Heavy bags hung in neat rows, a boxing ring dominated the center of the space, and various exercise equipment lined the walls. The sound of fists hitting bags and the rhythmic clicking of jump ropes filled the air, along with the occasional grunt of effort. Several people were training, but what caught Marcus's attention was an older man watching everything from near the ring, his ramrod-straight posture screaming military discipline. Before Marcus could approach him, a familiar voice called out, "You actually came." Jason Chen emerged from a back room, hand wraps dangling from his fingers. "Took you long enough." The older man Marcus had noticed turned at Jason's words, his sharp eyes taking in Marcus's battered appearance. He moved with the fluid grace of someone who knew exactly what his body was capable of, despite being well into his 60s. "Sergeant Martinez," Jason said. "This is the kid I told you about." The sergeant's weathered face remained neutral as he assessed Marcus. "You look like you've had a rough day, son," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that commanded respect without having to demand it. Marcus touched his swollen nose self-consciously. Jason said I should come here." "Did he now?" Martinez's eyes flickered to Jason before returning to Marcus. "And why's that?" The question hung in the air as Marcus struggled to find the right words. Finally, he blurted out, "Because I'm tired of being afraid, tired of being weak, tired of—" His voice cracked slightly. "Tired of being me." Something shifted in Martinez's expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes. "Being you isn't the problem, son. It's not knowing who you can be that's holding you back." He gestured for Marcus to follow him to his office. The office was small but orderly, with military memorabilia and boxing photos covering the walls. Marcus's eyes were drawn to a particular photo showing a younger Martinez in marine dress blues, medals gleaming on his chest. 23 years in the Corps, Martinez said, noting Marcus's interest. "Taught hand-to-hand combat to hundreds of Marines. Now I teach civilians how to defend themselves." He sat behind his desk, gesturing for Marcus to take the other chair. "But I don't teach bullies or thugs. I'm not in the business of creating more problems in this world." "I don't want to be a bully," Marcus said quickly. I just want to stop being one's favorite target." Martinez nodded slowly. "There's a difference between being a warrior and being a fighter. Warriors train not because they want to hurt others, but because they want to be strong enough to protect themselves and those who can't protect themselves." He leaned forward. "Which one are you looking to be?" The question hit Marcus hard, making him really think about what he wanted. "I want to be someone who doesn't have to live in fear," he finally answered. "Someone who can stand up for himself and others." Martinez studied him for a long moment, then reached into his desk and pulled out some forms. "Training here isn't easy. I run this place like I ran my Marine units, guided with discipline, respect, and dedication. No shortcuts, no excuses." He pushed the papers across the desk. "You'll need your mother's signature since you're a minor. Monthly fee is $50. Marcus's heart sank at the mention of money. I can't afford that right now," he admitted, thinking of Connor's demands. Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Jason told me about your situation. We can work something out. Cleaning the gym after hours, helping with equipment maintenance, but I need to know you're serious about this." For the first time that day, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. "I am, sir. I really am." "Good," Martinez said, standing up. "Because once we start, there's no quitting. You're either all in or you're out. And if you're all in, I promise you this. The person who walked in here today won't be the same person walking out in a few months." As Marcus left the gym that evening, forms clutched in his hand, He realized that while his body still ached from Connor's beating, something had changed inside him. The fear that had been his constant companion for so long was still there, but now it had competition, determination, hope, and the first stirrings of something that felt like courage. That evening, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his mother, the gym membership forms between them. His swollen face and bruised ribs had already sparked a tearful conversation about the bullying he'd been enduring. Now he was laying out his plan to do something about it. Boxing, his mother said, her nurse's eyes still assessing his injuries with professional concern. Marcus, honey, I don't know. Fighting isn't the answer to bullying. She looked exhausted after her 12-hour shift, her scrubs still wrinkled from work. It's not about fighting, Mom, Marcus insisted, remembering Sergeant Martinez's words. It's about learning to defend myself, about getting stronger. He hesitated before adding, and maybe about finding out who I can be, instead of just accepting who everyone thinks I am. His mother picked up the forms, reading through them carefully. Old Marines Gym? That's in a rough neighborhood, Marcus. And $50 a month? She bit her lip, and Marcus could see her mentally reviewing their tight budget. Sergeant Martinez said I can work it off, Marcus explained quickly. Cleaning, maintenance, whatever they need. Please, Mom. I need this. His voice cracked slightly on the last words, revealing just how desperately he wanted the chance. His mother looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him, perhaps seeing for the first time just how much the bullying had affected him. Tell me about this Sergeant Martinez, she said finally. Marcus described his meeting with the former Marine, the gym's atmosphere, and Jason's recommendation. As he spoke, he could see his mother's expression shifting from concern to contemplation. I want to meet him, she declared. If I'm going to let my 16-year-old son spend time in that neighborhood, I need to know he's in good hands. The next day was Saturday, and Marcus found himself back at Old Marine's gym, this time with his mother beside him. The gym was busier than his first visit, filled with the sounds of training and the energy of focused dedication. Sergeant Martinez greeted them immediately, his presence just as commanding in a simple polo shirt as it had been the day before. Mrs. Chen, he said, shaking her hand. Thank you for coming in. Marcus watched as Martinez gave them a tour of the facility, explaining the training program and safety protocols. His mother asked pointed questions about supervision, emergency procedures, and the gym's track record. Martinez answered each query with patient professionalism, his military background evident in his precise responses. We're not about creating fighters here, Mrs. Chen, Martinez explained as they watched a teenage girl practicing combinations on a heavy bag, her technique crisp and controlled. We're about building confidence, discipline, and self-respect. The physical training is important, but it's the mental transformation that really matters. They ended up in Martinez's office again, where the sergeant shared stories about other young people he'd helped over the years. Last year we had a kid much like Marcus, he said. Being bullied, no confidence, angry at the world. Now he's one of our best junior instructors, mentoring other kids who were in his position. Marcus's mother studied the photos on the wall, particularly one showing Martinez with a group of smiling teenagers at what appeared to be a boxing competition. And the neighborhood? She asked. I worry about him traveling here alone. Jason Chen's been helping kids from your area arrange carpools, Martinez replied. He's one of our success stories himself. Came here 3 years ago with a chip on his shoulder the size of Texas. Now he's headed to the Naval Academy next fall. That detail seemed to catch his mother's attention. Finally, after what felt like hours to Marcus, she picked up the pen Martinez had placed on his desk. If your grades drop even a little, she warned Marcus as she signed the forms, or if I hear about you using what you learn here to bully others. That won't happen, Marcus promised quickly. Really, Mom? It better not, Martinez added firmly. First sign of trouble. First hint that you're misusing what we teach here and you're out, no second chances. With the forms signed and the rules established, Martinez led Marcus to the locker room. "Be here Monday at 4, he instructed. "Bring gym clothes, water bottle, and a positive attitude. Everything else we'll provide." As Marcus and his mother left the gym, she pulled him into a tight hug, careful of his bruised ribs. "I'm proud of you for wanting to make a change," she said softly. "Just be careful, okay?" "I will, Mom," Marcus promised, feeling a new sense of possibility opening up before him. The weekend passed in a blur of anticipation and nervousness. Marcus spent Sunday researching boxing basics online, watching training videos, and trying to prepare himself mentally for what was to come. He also had to deal with texts from Peter and Sarah, who were both concerned and excited about his decision to start training. "Just promise you won't forget about us when you're all buff and tough," Sarah joked during their group video chat. "As if," Marcus replied, managing a smile. "I'll need you guys more than ever to keep me grounded." Monday morning brought a new kind of anxiety as Marcus packed his gym bag. Connor and his crew were still a threat, and the monthly rent deadline was approaching, but somehow their intimidation felt different now. Not less scary, exactly, but less overwhelming. As he walked through the school halls that day, Marcus found himself standing a little straighter, even though his ribs still ached. He had a secret now, not just the training he was about to begin, but the knowledge that he was finally taking control of his life. After school, as he boarded the bus to the gym, Marcus felt like he was stepping into a new chapter of his life. He didn't know exactly what awaited him at Old Marine's gym, but he knew one thing for certain. He was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Marcus's first week of training at Old Marine's gym had been both exhilarating and humbling. His body ached in places he didn't know could ache, but there was something satisfying about the pain. It meant change was happening. One afternoon, while Marcus was mopping the gym floor after his training session, Sergeant Martinez called him into the office. "Got a minute, son?" Inside the office, Martinez wasn't alone. Jason Chen sat in one of the chairs, his expression serious. "Tell him what you told me," Martinez instructed Jason. "Connor's getting impatient," Jason said, cutting straight to the point. "Word is he's planning something big to make an example of you. Tomorrow, probably." Marcus's stomach tightened, but the panic he expected didn't come. Instead, he felt something different, a calm sort of clarity. "I still can't pay him," he said. "No," Martinez agreed, "but maybe we can use this situation to our advantage." He leaned forward in his chair. "How long have you been training now?" "A week and 2 days, sir." Martinez nodded. Not nearly enough time to be ready for a real confrontation, but... He paused, studying Marcus thoughtfully. "Maybe we can buy you some time." Jason picked up the thread. "Connor respects money and power. If we can convince him there's more profit in waiting, he might back off long enough for you to get properly trained." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "Double or nothing," Martinez said simply. "Offer him double what he's demanding, but with conditions. You'll pay him $400, if he can take it from you in a fair fight. 1 month from now." Marcus's eyes widened. $400, but I don't have... "You won't need it," Martinez cut in. "Because in 1 month you'll be ready to defend yourself. Not to beat him up, not to become the bully, but to show him and everyone else that you're not an easy target anymore." "Connor's ego won't let him back down from a challenge like that," Jason added, "especially not with money involved. His reputation would take too big a hit." Marcus considered the plan. "But what if I'm not ready in a month?" Martinez's expression hardened. "Then you're not training hard enough. This isn't just about learning to throw punches, Marcus. It's about commitment, discipline, and heart. You show up every day, give everything you've got, and trust in your training." The next morning at school, Marcus spotted Connor and his crew by the lockers. His heart was pounding, but his voice remained steady as he approached them. "Hey Connor, we need to talk." Connor turned, surprised by Marcus's directness. Well, finally got our money, fat boy." "Better," Marcus said, forcing himself to maintain eye contact. I've got a deal for you. Double or nothing. This caught Connor's attention. I'm listening. $400. You can have it. If you can take it from me in a fair fight. 1 month from now. Connor's laugh echoed through the hallway, drawing a crowd. Are you serious? You want to fight me? 1 month, Marcus repeated. No ganging up, no cheap shots, just you and me. If you win, you get $400. If I win, you leave me. And everyone else alone. Connor stepped closer, trying to intimidate Marcus with his height. And why should I wait a month? I could just take what you owe me now. Because 400 is better than 200, Marcus replied, surprising himself with his calmness. And because everyone will know if you're too scared to fight fair. The crowd's whispers grew louder. Connor's face reddened slightly. Fine, he spat. 1 month. But when I put you in the hospital, don't say I didn't warn you. As Connor and his crew walked away, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Mr. Rodriguez, the security guard. I heard everything, he said quietly. Bold move, son. Very bold. Yes, sir, Marcus replied, his confidence starting to waver now that the confrontation was over. You know, Mr. Rodriguez said, before I worked security, I was a Marine. He smiled slightly at Marcus's surprised look. Sergeant Martinez is a good man. Tell him Gunny Rodriguez says hello. That afternoon at the gym, Martinez modified Marcus's training schedule. The clock's ticking now, he said. We've got 4 weeks to get you ready. That means training every day, including weekends. You up for it? Yes, sir, Marcus replied without hesitation. Good, because from now on, every second counts. We're not trying to turn you into a professional boxer in a month. That's impossible. What we can do is teach you enough to defend yourself effectively. As Marcus wrapped his hands for training, Jason approached him. Bold move this morning, he said. But now you've got to back it up. No shortcuts, no excuses. The news of Marcus's challenge spread through the school like wildfire. Some people thought he was brave, others thought he was stupid. Sarah and Peter were worried sick. Are you sure about this? Peter asked during lunch. I mean, Connor's been in fights before. He's dangerous. That's why I need this month, Marcus explained. I'm not planning to beat him up. I just need to show everyone, that I'm not an easy target anymore. Sarah squeezed his hand. Just be careful, okay? We've seen what he can do when he's angry. That evening, as Marcus cleaned the gym after another intense training session, he caught his reflection in the mirror. He didn't look different yet. 1 week of training hadn't magically transformed his body. But something in his eyes had changed. There was a determination there that hadn't existed before. Martinez walked up behind him. Remember something, son. The next 4 weeks aren't just about getting stronger or learning to throw punches. They're about becoming someone who doesn't need to prove himself to bullies like Connor, someone who knows his own worth. Marcus nodded, understanding that he had just committed himself to more than just a fight. He had committed himself to a complete transformation. The countdown had begun, and there was no turning back now. The first days of serious training hit Marcus like a freight train. Sergeant Martinez wasn't kidding when he said every second would count. Each session began with a grueling warm-up that left Marcus gasping for air. Jump rope, burpees, mountain climbers, and endless rounds of shadowboxing. Keep those hands up, Martinez barked as Marcus threw combinations at the heavy bag, his arms feeling like lead weights. Your guard drops every time you get tired. In a real fight, that's how you get knocked out. The basic mechanics of boxing seemed simple enough when Marcus watched others do it. Jab, cross, hook, uppercut. But doing them correctly, with proper form and balance, was another matter entirely. His feet kept tangling up, his punches often missed their mark, and his stamina gave out far too quickly. I can't, Marcus wheezed during a particularly tough session, doubling over with his hands on his knees. Can't isn't in our vocabulary, Martinez said firmly. "Drop and give me 20 push-ups now." As Marcus struggled through the push-ups, his arms trembling, doubt began to creep in. What had he been thinking, challenging Connor? The guy was naturally athletic, had been in plenty of fights, and probably wouldn't fight fair anyway. Jason noticed Marcus's frustration during their water break. "Everyone struggles at first," he said, tossing Marcus a towel. "You should have seen me when I started. Couldn't even skip rope for 30 seconds without tripping." "But I only have 4 weeks," Marcus replied, wiping sweat from his face. "Connor's going to destroy me." "Maybe," Jason admitted. "Or maybe you're stronger than you think. Martinez wouldn't have agreed to this if he didn't see something in you." The next day at school, Marcus could barely lift his arms to open his locker. Every muscle screamed in protest at the slightest movement. Connor and his crew noticed his discomfort and made sure to bump into him between classes, each collision sending fresh waves of pain through his body. "Looking a little sore there, Tubby," Connor taunted. "Having second thoughts about our deal?" Marcus didn't respond, but inside the doubts were growing louder. During lunch, he barely touched his food, which immediately worried Sarah and Peter. "You need to eat," Sarah insisted, pushing her apple toward him. "You can't train on an empty stomach." "I don't know if I can do this," Marcus finally admitted. "Maybe I should just try to get the money somehow. My mom has some savings." "No way," Peter cut in. "You can't let them win like that. Besides, they'll just keep demanding more." After school, Marcus dragged himself to the gym, every step feeling heavier than the last. Martinez took one look at him and called him into the office. "You look like hell, son," the sergeant said bluntly. "I feel like it too, sir." Martinez leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus carefully. "Want to know why I agreed to this crazy plan of yours? Because I've seen that look before. In the Corps, we called it the breaking point, that moment when a recruit either quits or pushes through and discovers what they're really made of." "What if I'm not made of anything special?" Marcus asked quietly. "What if I'm just me? Just you?" Martinez stood up and walked to one of the photos on his wall. It showed a group of Marines, young and battle-worn. "See this guy here?" He pointed to a heavyset Marine in the middle. "That's me, about 30 years ago. They called me Pudge in boot camp. Thought I'd never make it." Marcus looked closer at the photo, surprised. The sergeant he knew was lean and powerful. It was hard to imagine him ever being overweight. "Know what I learned?" Martinez continued. "It's not about being special. It's about being stubborn, refusing to quit even when every part of you wants to, especially when every part of you wants to." He turned back to Marcus. "So here's what we're going to do. Today's session is canceled." "What? But I only have—" "Instead," Martinez cut him off, "you're going to help me clean every inch of this gym. While we work, I'm going to tell you about every person who walked through that door thinking they couldn't change, and how wrong they were." For the next 3 hours, as they scrubbed equipment and mopped floors, Martinez shared story after story. The troubled kid who became a police officer, the domestic violence survivor who opened her own self-defense school, the overweight businessman who lost 100 pounds and now ran marathons. "You know what all these people had in common?" Martinez asked as they finished up. "They all wanted to quit in their first week, and they all came back anyway." That night, Marcus lay in bed, his muscles still aching but his mind clearer than it had been in days. He pulled out his phone and started making a list. Wake up 30 minutes earlier for stretching, pack healthy snacks for energy, watch boxing technique videos during lunch, practice footwork while brushing teeth, shadow box during study breaks. The next morning, despite every fiber of his body protesting, Marcus got up early and did his stretches. At school, he ignored Connor's taunts and focused on eating right and staying hydrated. During class breaks, he practiced shifting his weight from foot to foot, just as Martinez had taught him. When he arrived at the gym that afternoon, Martinez nodded approvingly at his improved energy level. "Ready to work?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. And this time, he meant it. "Good. Because from now on, we're doing 2-a-days, Morning cardio before school, regular training after. Still want to prove the doubters wrong? Marcus wrapped his hands carefully the way Jason had shown him. Yes, sir. Every single one of them. Including yourself? Martinez asked pointedly. Marcus paused, then nodded. Especially myself. Then let's get to work. 3 weeks and 5 days until you show Connor Blake what just you is capable of. As Marcus squared up to the heavy bag, he realized something important. He was still scared, still doubting, still hurting. But for the first time in his life, he was also fighting back. Not just against Connor, but against every voice that had ever told him he wasn't enough, including his own. 2 weeks into his training, Marcus was starting to see subtle changes. His endurance had improved enough that he could make it through Martinez's brutal warm-ups without feeling like he might die. His punches were sharper, his footwork more coordinated. But what happened in the school cafeteria that day would push his transformation into overdrive. Marcus was sitting with Peter and Sarah when they heard the commotion. At a nearby table, Connor and his crew had surrounded Kevin, a freshman even smaller than Peter. They were dumping his backpack out, scattering his belongings across the floor while he frantically tried to gather them up. Please, Kevin begged, reaching for his calculator only to have Connor kick it away. That was my birthday present. Marcus felt his hands tighten into fists under the table. 2 weeks ago, he would have looked away, grateful it wasn't him being targeted. But something had changed inside him. Don't, Sarah whispered, seeing his expression. You're not ready yet. But Marcus was already standing. Hey, Connor, he called out, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Why don't you pick on someone your own size? The cafeteria went quiet. Connor turned slowly, a predatory grin spreading across his face. Someone like you, fat boy? 2 more weeks, remember? Or do you want to settle our business now? Marcus walked closer, noticing how Connor's crew shifted nervously. They weren't used to their victims showing backbone. I said leave him alone. Connor stepped into Marcus's personal space, using his height advantage to loom over him. But Marcus didn't back down. Instead, he remembered what Martinez had taught him about stance and balance, keeping his weight centered, ready to move. You got brave all of a sudden, Connor sneered. Maybe I should remind you. Is there a problem here? Mr. Rodriguez's voice cut through the tension. The security guard's timing was impeccable as always. Connor backed off, but not before whispering, 2 weeks, Tubby. I'm going to enjoy this. After school, Marcus arrived at the gym earlier than usual, hitting the heavy bag with renewed intensity. Each punch carried the frustration of watching Connor bully Kevin, of all the times he'd stayed silent, of every moment he'd felt powerless. Good energy, Martinez commented, watching from the corner. Something happened today? Marcus told him about the cafeteria incident between combinations. Martinez listened quietly, then called Jason over. Time for some sparring? Martinez announced. Marcus froze. They hadn't done any sparring yet, just pad work and bag work. Sir? You stood up for someone today, Martinez said. Showed real courage. Now it's time to see how you handle pressure. Jason helped Marcus with his headgear and gloves while Martinez explained the rules. Light contact only, focus on technique and movement. But even with the restrictions, getting in the ring felt different. More real. The first round was a disaster. Jason barely threw any punches, but Marcus still couldn't hit him. He kept flinching, closing his eyes, forgetting everything he'd learned. Again, Martinez ordered when the round ended. But this time, remember why you're here. Not just for yourself, but for every Kevin out there who needs someone to stand up for them. The second round went better. Marcus landed a few jabs, managed to slip some punches. By the third round, he was starting to find his rhythm. Much better, Jason said afterward, helping him remove his gloves. You're getting it. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the sparring session, thinking of what he could have done differently. Around midnight, his phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. "Thanks for today. No one's ever done that before." The next morning, Marcus started his run earlier than usual. As he jogged through his neighborhood, he spotted Connor's house. The lights were on, and through the window, he could see Connor doing push-ups in his room. The sight didn't frighten him as much as it used to. At school, something had shifted. People looked at him differently now. The freshmen who'd witnessed the cafeteria confrontation gave him subtle nods in the hallway. Even some of Connor's usual supporters seemed less certain about the upcoming fight. During his afternoon training session, Martinez noticed Marcus's improved focus. "You're moving different," he observed. "Finally believing in yourself?" "Getting there, sir," Marcus replied between combinations. "Good. Because now, we're going to push even harder. 2 weeks left means double the workload. You ready for that?" Marcus thought about Kevin's text, about all the others who endured bullying in silence. "Yes, sir. Whatever it takes." The new training schedule was brutal. Morning runs got longer. Afternoon sessions now included sparring with different partners, each with their own style. Marcus learned to handle aggressive fighters, counterpunchers, southpaws. His body was changing too. Not dramatically, but his clothes fit differently, and his movement had become more athletic. Sarah noticed the changes during lunch one day. "You're not even out of breath carrying your tray up the stairs anymore," she observed. "And you haven't stress-eaten in weeks," Peter added. "Though I kind of miss sharing my fries with you." Marcus laughed, but he knew they were right. The transformation wasn't just physical. His confidence had grown not in a loud or aggressive way, but in the quiet certainty that came from proving to himself, day after day, that he was capable of more than he'd thought possible. Even his mother noticed the difference. "You're standing taller," she said one evening. "Your father would be proud." The mention of his father, who'd passed away when Marcus was 10, hit hard. "You think so?" "I know so. He always said true strength wasn't about muscles or fighting. It was about having the courage to stand up for what's right." That weekend, Martinez had a surprise for Marcus. He'd arranged for several of his former students to come spar with him, including some who'd gone on to compete amateur. "Time to test yourself against different styles," Martinez explained. "Connor's a brawler. He'll come straight at you, trying to overwhelm you with aggression. You need to be ready for that." The sparring sessions were tough, but Marcus held his own better than he expected. One of the former students, a police officer now, pulled him aside afterward. "You've got heart, kid," he said. "That's what matters most in a fight. Technique is important. But heart? That's what keeps you going when everything else tells you to quit." As Marcus helped clean the gym that evening, Martinez called him into the office one more time. "2 weeks ago, you were ready to quit," the sergeant said. "Now look at you. Know what changed?" Marcus thought about it. "I stopped fighting just for myself." Martinez nodded approvingly. "Exactly. The moment you stood up for that kid in the cafeteria, something clicked. You realized this was bigger than just you and Connor?" "Yes, sir. 1 more week of hard training, then we taper off so you're fresh for the fight. But remember, win or lose, you've already proven something important." "What's that, sir?" "That change is possible. That bullies only have power when we let fear control us. And that sometimes the biggest guy in the fight isn't the one throwing punches. It's the one standing up for others." Marcus left the gym that night feeling stronger than ever, not just physically, but mentally. 1 week left until his confrontation with Connor. 1 week to prepare for a fight that, win or lose, would prove that he wasn't the same person who'd walked into Old Marine's gym a month ago. He was ready. With just 1 week left until the confrontation, Marcus's life had fallen into a rhythm of constant improvement. His daily routine had become almost military in its precision. Morning runs, school, training, homework, sleep, repeat. But it wasn't just his physical capabilities that were evolving. During lunch period, Marcus noticed Connor watching him from across the cafeteria. studying him with a mixture of confusion and growing concern. The old Marcus would have shrunk under that gaze, but now he met it steadily, causing Connor to look away first. "He's worried," Sarah observed, following Marcus's gaze. "He can see you're different." Marcus nodded, taking a bite of his carefully planned lunch: protein, complex carbs, and vegetables, just as Martinez had recommended. He should be. Later that day, an unexpected moment highlighted just how much Marcus had changed. As he was heading to his last class, he heard familiar taunting voices around the corner. Initially thinking it was Connor's crew, he approached cautiously, only to find two juniors he didn't know harassing a freshman girl. "Come on, just let us see your art portfolio," one of them was saying, trying to grab her sketchbook while she clutched it protectively. Without hesitation, Marcus stepped forward. "She said no," he stated firmly, his voice carrying the quiet confidence he'd developed over the past few weeks. The two juniors turned, clearly ready to confront whoever was interrupting them. But something in Marcus's stance, the way he carried himself now, made them pause. "Whatever," the taller one muttered, backing away. "Not worth the trouble." The girl, who introduced herself as Maya, thanked him profusely. "I've seen you at the gym," she added. "My brother trains there too. Everyone's talking about your upcoming fight." Word of the confrontation spread quickly, adding to Marcus's growing reputation. By the end of the day, even some of Connor's usual supporters were stopping Marcus in the halls to wish him luck. At the gym that afternoon, Martinez had Marcus working on specific scenarios they expected from Connor. "He's a right-hand heavy fighter," the sergeant explained. "Likes to overwhelm with aggression. We've seen it in the videos Sarah recorded of his previous fights." Jason, playing the role of Connor during sparring, threw wild combinations that Marcus had to either slip or block while maintaining his composure. "Good," Martinez called out. "Stay calm, stick to the game plan. Let him wear himself out." During one of their water breaks, Jason shared some insights. "Connor's never had to fight someone who isn't afraid of him," he noted. "Fear is his biggest weapon. Take that away, and he's just another angry kid who never learned to control himself." The next day at school, Marcus experienced another kind of victory. His biology test, which he'd studied for between training sessions, came back with an A. His mother had made it clear that maintaining his grades was non-negotiable if he wanted to continue training, and somehow the discipline from the gym had carried over into his studies. "It's all connected," Martinez told him during their evening session. "The focus you learn here, the discipline, the dedication, it applies to everything in life. That's why we're not just training your body, we're training your mind." As the week progressed, Marcus noticed other changes too. His old clothes were looser, his breathing was easier, and most importantly, his confidence had grown into something solid and real. It wasn't the fake bravado that Connor displayed, but rather a quiet certainty in his own capabilities. Sarah captured this transformation in a series of photographs she'd been taking throughout his training. Looking at them side by side, the change was evident, not just in his physical appearance, but in the way he carried himself, the look in his eyes. "You're not the same person anymore," she said, showing him the photos. "And it's not just the training. You found something inside yourself that was always there, just waiting to come out." Even Peter, who had initially been skeptical of the whole plan, had to admit the change was remarkable. "Remember when we used to hide in the library during lunch to avoid Connor?" he asked. "Now you're the one people are coming to for protection." The reality of this hit home when Kevin, the freshman Marcus had defended, approached him with a request. Could you teach me some of what you've learned?" he asked hesitantly. "Not to fight, just to not be afraid anymore." Marcus looked at the younger student, seeing his former self in Kevin's uncertain posture and nervous eyes. "Meet me at Old Marine's gym after school," he said. "There's someone you should meet." That evening, as Marcus watched Martinez working with Kevin on the basics, he realized something important. His transformation wasn't just about standing up to Connor anymore. It had become about something bigger, about breaking the cycle of fear and helplessness that bullies relied on to maintain their power. "You're getting it," Martinez said quietly, coming to stand beside him. "Real strength isn't about dominating others. It's about lifting them up." Marcus nodded, understanding, now, why the sergeant had agreed to help him in the first place. It had never been just about teaching him to fight. It was about teaching him to lead, to protect, to make a difference. As the final days before the confrontation ticked down, Marcus felt a strange sense of calm settling over him. Win or lose, he had already achieved something more important than victory in a fight. He had become someone worth being, someone who stood up not just for himself, but for others. The old Marcus was gone, replaced by someone stronger, braver, and wiser. Now it was time to show Connor and everyone else exactly what that meant. The day before the scheduled confrontation arrived with an electric tension in the air. The entire school seemed to buzz with anticipation, and even teachers appeared to sense something was brewing. Rumors circulated about the location and time, with students already planning how to record the event without getting caught. Connor spent the morning strutting through the halls with exaggerated confidence, his crew flanking him like an honor guard. "Hope you've got my money ready, fat boy," he called out whenever he spotted Marcus. But there was something forced about his bravado now, a hint of uncertainty in his eyes that hadn't been there before. During lunch, Marcus sat with Sarah and Peter as usual, maintaining his pre-fight meal plan despite his churning stomach. "You seem calm," Sarah observed, studying his face carefully. "Martinez says the calm ones are the most dangerous," Marcus replied, managing a small smile. "Though, honestly, I'm terrified." "You don't look terrified," Peter said. "You look ready." A commotion at the cafeteria entrance drew their attention. Jason had walked in, something he rarely did, preferring to eat lunch in the senior courtyard. He made his way directly to Connor's table, ignoring the sudden hush that fell over the room. "Tomorrow, behind the old warehouse on Mason Street, 4 o'clock, Jason announced loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "No weapons, no ganging up, just you and him." Connor stood up, trying to use his height advantage, but Jason didn't flinch. "What makes you think you get to set the terms?" Connor demanded. "Because if you don't agree, everyone will know you were too scared to fight fair," Jason replied coolly. "Your choice." The cafeteria erupted in whispers as Jason walked away, stopping briefly at Marcus's table. "Mason Street gives you clear escape routes if things go wrong," he said quietly. Martinez approved the location. After school, Marcus headed to the gym for his final training session. Martinez had scaled back the intensity over the past few days, ensuring Marcus would be fresh for tomorrow. Instead of physical training, they focused on strategy. "Remember," Martinez said, as they reviewed footage of Connor's previous fights, "he's got two major weaknesses. First, he telegraphs his right hand, drops his shoulder every time. Second, he gets frustrated when things don't go his way. Use both against him." Jason arrived later with additional intelligence. "Connor's been hitting the weights hard trying to bulk up for tomorrow. He'll be strong but stiff. And word is he tried to get his cousin, the one with the brass knuckles, to show up." "Will he?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "No," Jason replied with a grim smile. "Let's just say his cousin got a convincing argument about staying away." As evening approached, Martinez called Marcus into his office one last time. The old sergeant seemed unusually reflective. "Tomorrow isn't just about you and Connor anymore," he said, gesturing to the wall of photos behind him. "Every kid who's ever been bullied, every person who's felt powerless, they're all going to be watching, not just at your school, but online too. This is bigger than a fight now." "No pressure," Marcus joked weakly. Martinez's expression remained serious. "You're ready, not just physically, but mentally. You've learned the most important lesson, that true strength comes from protecting others, not dominating them." That night, Marcus could barely sleep. His phone kept buzzing with messages of support from classmates, many of whom he'd barely spoken to before. Even Kevin sent a text. "You stood up for me. Tomorrow we stand up for you." Around midnight, his mother knocked on his door. "I know you're awake," she said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "I want you to know something. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you. Not for fighting, but for finding something worth fighting for. Morning came too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Marcus went through his regular routine: morning run, light breakfast, stretching. At school, the tension was palpable. Even teachers seemed distracted, perhaps aware of what was coming, but powerless to stop it. Connor made one last attempt at intimidation during passing period, shoving Marcus into the lockers. Last chance to back out, he growled, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. See you at 4, Marcus replied calmly, maintaining eye contact until Connor turned away. After final bell, Marcus headed to the gym for last-minute preparations. Martinez helped him wrap his hands while Jason went over the game plan one more time. Remember, Martinez said as they finished, you're not just fighting Connor. You're fighting every bully who ever made someone feel small. You're fighting for change. Looking in the mirror one last time before heading out, Marcus barely recognized himself. Not because of the physical changes, though those were evident, but because of the determination in his eyes. The scared, overweight freshman who'd walked into this gym a month ago was gone. As he stepped out into the afternoon sun, ready to head to Mason Street, Marcus felt a strange mix of fear and certainty. The fear reminded him he was human. The certainty told him he was ready. It was time to show everyone what he'd become. By 3:45 p.m., a crowd had already gathered behind the old warehouse on Mason Street. Students from every grade formed a wide circle, phones ready to record what many believed would be just another bullying incident. They didn't know what was about to unfold. Marcus arrived with Jason and Martinez, who hung back at the edge of the crowd. His mother, despite knowing about the fight, had been kept in the dark about its exact timing and location. Some things were better explained afterward. Connor showed up 5 minutes late, his crew trying to part the crowd dramatically. His confident smirk faltered slightly when he saw Marcus standing calmly in the center of the circle, hands wrapped professionally, stance relaxed but ready. "Last chance to just give me the money," Connor called out, shrugging off his varsity jacket. "Save yourself the embarrassment." Marcus remained silent, remembering Martinez's words. Let him talk. Your actions will speak louder. As Connor stepped into the circle, the crowd's energy shifted. This wasn't the usual scene of a bully intimidating his victim. Something was different. Marcus looked prepared. "Ready?" Jason asked loudly, acting as impromptu referee. Both fighters nodded. "Keep it clean. Fight ends when someone gives up or can't continue. Begin." Connor charged immediately, just as Martinez had predicted. His right hand telegraphed clearly, the same shoulder drop they'd studied in videos. Marcus slipped the punch easily, countering with a quick jab that caught Connor by surprise. The crowd's reaction was instant. Gasps and exclamations erupted as Connor stumbled back, more shocked than hurt. His face reddened with embarrassment as he realized this wouldn't be the easy win he'd expected. "Lucky punch," Connor snarled, attacking again with a wild combination. But Marcus had trained for this exact scenario. He blocked, slipped, and countered, making Connor's aggression work against him. By the 2-minute mark, Connor was breathing heavily, his attacks becoming increasingly desperate. Marcus, on the other hand, remained composed, controlling the distance just as he'd practiced countless times with Jason. "Stand and fight, you coward," Connor shouted, frustration evident in his voice. Marcus finally spoke, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "I'm not the one who needs to prove anything anymore." Something snapped in Connor. He rushed forward recklessly, throwing haymaker after haymaker. Marcus blocked most, but one caught him on the shoulder, sending him back a step. The crowd gasped, expecting him to crumble. Instead, Marcus did exactly what he'd trained for. He maintained his balance, remembered his breathing, and launched the counter combination Martinez had drilled into him, jab, cross, hook. Each punch landed cleanly. Connor staggered, his previous bravado completely gone. For the first time, real fear showed in his eyes, not of being hurt, but of being exposed. The illusion of his invincibility was shattering in front of the entire school. "Had enough?" Marcus asked, maintaining his guard. Connor's response was to charge again, but his movements were sloppy now, predictable. Marcus sidestepped and delivered a perfectly timed right hook, not thrown with maximum power, but with precise technique. Connor dropped to one knee, more from exhaustion and shock than from the force of the blow. The crowd went silent. Everyone waited for Marcus to move in for the finish, to humiliate Connor the way he'd humiliated so many others. Instead, Marcus stepped back and lowered his hands. "It's over," he said firmly. "No money, no threats, no more bullying, not just me, anyone, it ends today." Connor looked up, blood trickling from his nose, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. The crowd began to murmur, phones still recording every moment. This wasn't just a fight anymore, it was a changing of the guard. "Fine," Connor muttered, getting to his feet. "Whatever." He tried to push his way through the crowd, but no one moved for him anymore. His power was gone. As the crowd began to disperse, their phones already uploading videos that would become legendary in school history, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Martinez. "You did good, son," the sergeant said quietly. "Real good." The aftermath was more dramatic than the fight itself. By Monday morning, the videos had spread far beyond the school, accompanied by the story of the bullied kid who transformed himself. Local news picked up the story, focusing not on the fight, but on the message behind it. That change was possible, that victims could become their own heroes. Marcus's mother, after the initial shock and concern, came to understand and even appreciate what her son had accomplished. The school administration, while officially disapproving of fighting, couldn't ignore the positive changes that followed. Bullying incidents dropped significantly as other students found their courage. Old Marine's gym saw an influx of new members, many of them kids who'd been inspired by Marcus's transformation. Martinez made him a junior instructor, teaching beginners the same lessons he'd learned about strength, discipline, and standing up for others. Connor transferred schools a month later, but before he left, he did something unexpected. He approached Marcus in the hallway, not to fight, but to talk. "You could have really hurt me that day," he said awkwardly. "Why didn't you?" Marcus thought about it before answering. "Because the goal was never to become what I was fighting against." As Marcus walked into the gym that afternoon, greeted by the familiar sounds of gloves hitting bags and the scent of hard work, he caught his reflection in the mirror. The physical changes were obvious now, but they weren't what mattered most. What mattered was the change inside, the knowledge that one person standing up could inspire others to do the same. Sarah had captured it perfectly in the school newspaper's headline, "Victory Beyond the Fight. How one student's stand against bullying changed everything." Marcus smiled, wrapping his hands for another training session. The fight might have been over, but his real journey, helping others find their own strength, was just beginning.